Hey guys, what's up? Welcome to another episode of the Coach Cody podcast. It's been a few weeks since I've done a solo podcast. I've almost forgot how to do it. I had some really good guests the past 3 weeks. Now it's just me again. Sorry. But if you haven't listened to those podcasts, definitely make sure you do. There's a lot of good things to learn from them. One was about religious trauma. One was about gut health, and the other was about fibromyalgia. So those are all really great episodes that you're going to want to take a listen to. But today, I wanted to talk about some basic principles of training. I've gone over some nutrition stuff so far. Haven't gone through a lot of training stuff. So that is what I wanted specifically to touch on. And I'm just going to kind of go right into it. Going to skip the study segment here just because it's a little bit longer of a subject topic, so I wanted to dive into that first. And so to keep things interesting, well, I'll go into everything first, and then I'm gonna debunk some things about some training myths. But all right, so training in the gym. Let's say you're wanting to be a bodybuilder. You're gonna have to lift some weights. So how do you lift weights in a way that's going to help you build muscle? How is it going to help you progress? So first things first, you want to start with the gym. Just kidding. You're all probably aware of that. But one of the core principles of strength training, whether it's powerlifting or bodybuilding, is progressive overload. So what is progressive overload? Essentially, it's just placing more stress on the muscle to get it to adapt and build, get stronger, that sort of thing. So every time you're in the gym, you're breaking down muscle fibers, and you have to keep challenging your muscles, because if you don't, you're not giving it a reason to grow and adapt. So that's basically what is behind the term progressive overload, is ways to overload your muscle. So there's different ways you can do this. It doesn't have to be just by increasing weight, but that is one of the main ways you can practice progressive overload. So if you lifted 100 pounds, I always come up with the most random numbers, is like so it's 100-pound dumbbell press. You're an advanced lifter already. So you did 100 pounds on the dumbbell bench press last week. Maybe this week you want to try 105-pound bench press or something along those lines. You know, you're not going to be able to go up in weight from week to week, especially the more advanced you get. In the beginning, you have a little something called newbie gains, and your progress in the gym is a lot quicker. So just keep in mind that as you advance, the slower the progress comes, which is a hard pill to swallow, but unfortunately that is true. So increasing weight, another way to practice progressive overload is increasing repetitions. So maybe you did 8 reps last time, now you're aiming for 9. Or maybe you did 9, now you're aiming for 10, and then you're going to work up to 12. So that's another way that you can do it. You can also increase the volume. So this would be like, well, increasing reps is also increasing the volume. So you could also increase your sets. So say you only did 3 sets of bench press, maybe this week you'll do 4. So that's all ways to practice progressive overload. Some other things you can do, I wouldn't necessarily say it was like progressive overload per se, but you can also make things harder by like reducing rest time or increasing time under tension, changing the tempo. But then also having better form is something that is also considered progressive overload. Even if you can't go up in weight from week to week, sometimes it will just feel easier, or your film will be improved, and that still means that you're making progress. So the more advanced you get, the more you're looking for like form improvement, because it does come so slow. But just remain patient. You will get there sometimes. There are some intensifiers that you can use, more advanced techniques to kind of get through a plateau when it comes to adding weight, but I'll go over that at another time. But let's talk about exercise selection. So when you're putting your training plan together, generally we have 2 different types of movements. We have compound movements and we have isolation movements. So which ones you're going to pick is going to be dependent on your goals. Are you looking to get stronger? Are you looking to build muscle? I mean, you can do both strength and muscle simultaneously, but there's different rep ranges. And when I say strength, I mean like powerlifting. Maybe you want to focus just on like your bench and your squat, uh, and your deadlift. So that'd be more in the powerlifting realm. So that's more strength focused. So it's going to be lower volume, but it's also going to be more intense. So you're going to be lifting very heavy weight, going to be less repetitions involved in your training plan. But also, so let's say you want to work on hypertrophy, which is what I'm going to focus on because I'm a bodybuilder. And that's what we prioritize, is building muscle. That is our overall goal. So let's say your goal is to be a bodybuilder and you want to build muscle. So you have your compound exercises. And this is movements that involve multiple joints, multiple muscle groups. So things like squats, deadlifts, bench press, these are all compound movements. And, it's basically giving you more bang for your buck. You're hitting more muscle groups with just one movement. And those are going to make up the majority of your training plan. But we also have isolation exercises. So if you're someone who is a strength athlete, these are not going to be on the high priority list. If you're looking to build muscle, improve lagging body parts, this is going to be more of a bodybuilding oriented situation here. So isolation exercises, so these target specific muscle groups. So bicep curls, for example, very specific to what you're working. You're working your biceps. Not a lot of whole else is going on there. Same with triceps, just isolating your triceps. You're going to get a little bit of other muscle group involvement, but mostly you're trying to isolate those muscles specifically. So also things I would say calf raises are also an isolation movement for your legs. Just want to give you a little bit more leg isolation specific. But those are all, I do both, and I'll kind of give you a little idea of how they all come into play. But so if you're doing compound exercises and you're doing isolation exercises as well, you want to sequence these in the appropriate manner. So you don't generally want to do isolation movements before your compound movements, because it's going to make you more fatigued. So if you're working your triceps, you're doing tricep isolation movements before you're doing your bench press, probably is going to kind of stunt your strength on the compound movements. So you do not want to necessarily work on those isolation movements before your compounds, unless you're doing something where, let's say, your triceps specifically are lagging. Then it might make more sense to do an isolation movement at the beginning of your workout as opposed to towards the end. So it all kind of depends, again, on your goals. But you can sequence your movements in a way that, prioritizes whatever your goals are. But let's say, it's chest day. So you start out with bench press, and then you go to incline bench press, and then you go to cable fly, and those are all your chest movements. So you're doing chest and triceps. Let's call it chest and tricep day. So then you put your isolation movements after your compound movements, because you are working your triceps when you are working your chest. It's just not completely isolated. So then after your last chest movement, you'll start doing some tricep pushdowns, some overhead tricep extensions, things like that. And that's a good way to kind of set up a training day so that you're focusing on, your chest. And like I said, unless you really need to bring up your triceps, then there might be an exception to flip-flop them. Or you can just have like a designated arm day, which is basically all isolation movements for your biceps and triceps. I love that day just because it's not as exhausting because you're working less muscle groups. Isolation movements are always less exhausting. I'm way more likely to, let's go with back and bicep day. If I do biceps first, I'm going to fatigue myself for those back movements. I can will myself to do bicep curls at the end of a back day, but it's a lot less likely I'm going to be able to will myself into doing rows or like bent over rows, because I'm already going to be fatigued if I'm doing those at the end of my workout. Another thing to think about is time and efficiency. So if you're someone who is short on time and you want to get in the gym in and out as fast as you can and still making it worth your while, then compound movements are going to be what you want to focus on the most. And if you think about things like, so CrossFit, for example, there's minimal to none when it comes to isolation movements. It's all compound movements because they're quick workouts. It's kind of what they're known for. I'm not here to say CrossFit is superior, but it's like if you need to get a workout in and you have limited time, if you are doing compound movements, you are working all the muscles in your body that you're wanting to, as long as you're hitting them, enough times per week. So say you're doing 3 full body workouts a week, focusing on compound movements is going to give you the most bang for your buck if you are short on time. So always prioritize those compound movements first and foremost. So periodization, what is that? So basically periodization is this way to strategically move yourself through different phases in training. So when it comes to bodybuilding, this might be like off-season training, prep, health phases. We have like a peak week when you're in contest prep, and like the different ways or like names for phasing these things. So we have, like a macro cycle. So this is like an entire plan. This could be like a year-long phase of your training, of your macro cycle. Then we got your mesocycle. So this lasts like several weeks to a few months. So maybe within your macro cycle, you have these mesocycles that you're focusing on something specific. So it's probably something like in bodybuilding, it's going to be like bulking and cutting. These will be different mesocycles. But also keep in mind that training does not change that much, whether you're bulking or cutting. A lot of it's going to come down to your nutrition. Unless you are in contest prep, there is going to be some effort to mitigate the fatigue, especially towards the end of your prep. Then you might, definitely going to lower the weight a bit. So it's not necessarily that the movements are going to change, but in the last few weeks of prep, you're probably not going to be squatting or deadlifting, that sort of thing, because it's not really worth it at that point. It's just going to fatigue you more than it's actually worth. So in those times, going to bring down the fatiguing, like compound movements that are really stressful on your central nervous system, because your recovery is not going to be great when you're in prep. You're exhausted, you're depleted. So those are some considerations to take into play when you are programming for contest prep. And then we got the microcycle. So this is like a little smaller part of your plan. It's usually like a week long. This could be a deload, for example, or it could be your peak week. So changing your training a little bit for peak week. Usually you are taking training down a little bit because you're trying to get some of that inflammation out before you hit the stage. When you work out, you do have a little bit more inflammation in your body. So when you rest up leading up to stage day, you might notice, if you cut back, take some rest days, you're going to have more definition. The scale might drop because you're releasing some of that inflammation that is basically water weight. So that's kind of seems maybe counterintuitive if you're prepping for a show and you're looking to be lean and shredded as fuck. But rest is also important. And so if you're tempted to work out on your peak week and your coach tells you to rest, do what your coach says. Make sure you rest. So now that we know what periodization is, macro, meso, micro, and there's also some folks that like to, so say if we're not bodybuilders and it's just general lifestyle stuff, you can even make phases where you're more in maintenance, or maybe a microcycle could be a diet break week. So you might move from, maintenance phase to bulking to cutting. So it's not all that different from bodybuilding, but you might potentially be able to incorporate more of a maintenance phase, or even, throw nutrition in there. It could be like an intuitive eating phase, but that doesn't really have to do as much with training as it just does with nutrition. But anyways, so let's talk about some practical training tips. So warm up and cool down. This is one of the big ones. So I think we've gone through many different phases or just trends in the fitness world of what is the appropriate warm-up, or what's the best warm-up. Should we be doing mobility routines before your warm-up? How long should it be? And I'll be real. If we all had to do like a 30-minute warm up before we got in the gym, chances are we're going to be tired before we even get started. So warming up could be something as simple as doing warm up sets in your workout. So again, maybe we're on that bench press. Before you work into your working set, you want to start with just the bar and then just do some reps with just the bar. Let your body go through the movement. This is kind of more of a dynamic workout versus a dynamic warm up versus doing things like static stretching. You don't want to static stretch before your workout because it can hinder your strength. So save that for post-workout. That'll be the most ideal time to do static stretching because your muscles are already warm, and it's just going to be more effective that way, and it's not going to hinder your strength. So when it comes to warm-ups, just making sure you're doing warm-up sets to work up to those weights will be sufficient because you're just warming your body up to go through the movements that you're about to take it through. So it doesn't have to be this long, drawn-out thing. You're doing like arm swings, leg kicks, that sort of thing, which you can totally do if you want. And, as you get older, being warm is going to be more crucial to prevent some injuries. But there's no promise that the longer your warm-up is, then the least likely you are to injure yourself. It just doesn't work that way, unfortunately. So biggest key, I would say, just make sure to do some warm-up sets. Don't just jump right into whatever weight you might think is going to be a PR that week, because that's definitely a recipe for injury. Another thing when it comes to training, I want to talk about intensity versus consistency. So you all know, I've said it a million times that consistency is key. I 100% mean that because it will always be key. But if you're just consistently going through the motions and you are not, you're just showing up, but you're not actually pushing yourself, then you're going to plateau. And that's where intensity would be key to keep you progressing. So it's almost like, it's like consistency is great, getting those foundations in, getting yourself in the gym consistently, but don't waste your time by half-assing your intensity, because that is going to be huge when it comes to making it so you're still progressing long-term and you don't get frustrated because you've plateaued. So your intensity is not just, like how you're feeling. A lot of times people think of intensity like CrossFit, where you're on the ground in a puddle of sweat, breathing hard, feeling like you are just gonna die. That's one piece of intensity, but intensity is also about like the weight you're lifting, how heavy you're going, and there's different ways to gauge this. You can use the RPE scale, you can use the RIR scale. So RPE is rate of perceived exertion, RIR is reps in reserve. Wow, brain farting, almost forgot what that meant. So these are ways to gauge your intensity, but if you're newer, the best way to kind of learn how to get intense is to take things to failure, but safely. So taking isolation movements to failure is going to be a really good way to practice having good intensity. You got to know what it feels like to actually hit true failure before you can really know how to push yourself. So a lot of us think that we're working out intensely. A lot of us think we don't have any reps left in us, but the reality is we probably do. And that's why practicing going to failure with movements like bicep curls, tricep extension, movements that are safe, it can help us learn how to push ourselves in other movements. But make sure you're safe. If you're going to failure on a compound movement, you want to make sure you have a spotter. That's when it gets a little bit more dangerous. I don't recommend going to failure on things like squats or bench press, especially if you don't have a spotter, because that can be dangerous. So that's why I always say to start with those isolation movements, just so you can get the feel of what it is supposed to feel like when you're pushing yourself. And that is one thing I will say. As much as, I wouldn't recommend CrossFit now, it did teach me intensity because it did push you to your absolute max. Not saying you have to do that every time, but it is the thing that I gauge my intensity off of. So that's why I think there's always room to be able to practice going to failure and really learning what that feels like, because I've felt it. And so that's how I know. Along with playing sports, there's always, being pushed as an athlete by your coach to the point where you don't think you can do anymore. That's the point that I always play in my head. If I'm in the gym, I always think about a coach screaming at me to keep going. And when I do that, usually I can keep going. Or if it's just my head being like, I can't, then I won't, right? So try to find, that voice, that motivator in your head that's going to push you through the discomfort that comes with the intensity that you're going to need in order to keep moving forward. I don't know if that made sense, but intensity is a lot more important than we might think. So if you're in the gym, you've been going consistently, well, one, you're going to have to be patient. But if you're really not seeing progress and it's been months, then you want to audit your intensity. And another way that you can do that, well, a training partner is one, or a coach is another, but filming your sets in the gym. Because if a lot of the times you might feel like something is really hard, you might feel like you don't have any reps left in you, but if you film the set and you watch it back and it looks easy, chances are you probably had more reps left in the tank, and you perceived it to be harder than it actually was for you, which we're humans. It happens a lot. I have done this plenty of times. This is why I always recommend filming your sets, whether you have a coach to send them to or not. Just having those on hand to watch. You're looking at your form. You're looking at your intensity. A way to gauge your intensity in your videos outside of just, seeing if it looked easy. Do you have do you have the poop face? Do you look like you're trying to take a giant shit? Are you grunting? Are you you shouldn't have a cute face when your intensity is in the right place. And what's the speed of the weight that you're lifting? So if you're doing a bench press and the bar doesn't even slow down when you're pushing it up the whole time, you definitely had more reps left in the tank. The bar should be slowing down as you get fatigued. So that last rep you should be pumping out should be like snail's pace, trying to get that up. All right. So that's how you look for your intensity always, but also when you're reviewing your footage. So those are, just little practical training tips. So now that's the most of it there. I'm keeping it very basic, but I did want to go over some common strength training myths. So myth number 1, lifting weights makes women bulky. This is one of those myths I wish that would go to die, because if it was true, I would have been happier a whole lot sooner, and I wouldn't have had a reason to transition, if it made me bulky and look like a man. I lifted a lot, even before I transitioned and started testosterone. I did do CrossFit. And although I got stronger, I never got bulky. I wish I did, but I didn't. So lifting does not make you bulky. I know this is a huge fear for women, and some women do build muscle easier than others, but that's also ultimately going to come down to, the food that you're eating, how much food you're eating, and, if you're using any supplements or substances outside of just food and training. So ladies, do not worry. Lifting's not going to make you bulky or look like a man, especially if you're not supplementing with testosterone or things like that. It's a lot harder to put on muscle than you might think. So myth number 2, another one I wish would go to die, is that high reps tone and low reps bulk. So when someone comes to me and says, I don't want to put on a ton of muscle, I just want to look toned. So what you mean is that you want to put on muscle. So basically being toned is more about your body fat percentage than it is about how you're lifting. So being toned just means being able to see the muscle definition that you've built underneath. So there's no secret way to just focus on being toned. You're still looking to build muscle. So anyways, hopefully that also makes sense. Myth number 3, I love this one. So you can target fat loss in specific areas, aka spot reduce. So if you're thinking that doing 100 crunches every day or 1,000 crunches every day is going to get you the six-pack abs you always wanted, I'm sorry to break it to you, but that is not the case. So although we can build up our abs like any other muscle and we can strengthen them, unfortunately, we're not going to see them unless we get our nutrition in check. So you got to be in a calorie deficit to burn fat so that you reveal your abs underneath. We generally have a layer of fat over our abs, which is why we can't see them. And depending, abs can be hard to get, and they're fun. They're fun to look at sometimes, but they're not necessarily fun to maintain. So if your goal is ever like six-pack abs, just know it's going to take a lot to get there, and it's going to take a lot to maintain. And maybe I feel like everyone should try for it at some point in their life just to know what it's like. But it is not something that I would recommend you do just base level shoot to have a six-pack year round, because it means you're pretty lean and it's going to be kind of hard to sustain. People do it. It's not impossible, but it will take some more discipline. You will have to be more rigid on your food choices and tracking your food and that sort of thing. So you just have to know, like, is your lifestyle aligned with the goals that you're making? And is it something that you can realistically achieve without driving yourself insane? All right. So this one, I can't say that I've heard this one a whole lot, especially not lately. But I think there has always been this question of which is better, machines or free weights. And both machines and free weights are great. I do not see any of them being more superior. With dumbbells, you are having to kind of recruit more muscle groups because you are also stabilizing yourself. So machines kind of do the stabilizing for you. And I will say that I think machines can be safer if you are beginning, because there's less likelihood that you're going to like drop something on your face like a dumbbell. There's some things that can occur if you're not being safe. So at least like with machines, it can be helpful. And if you're someone who has a significant amount of weight to lose, sometimes it can be hard to work with dumbbells, especially on the bench. So sometimes machines can be easier because it helps with stabilizing those weights for you. So I wouldn't say either or are more dangerous or less dangerous or superior, whatever. They just both have, different places in your training plan, but both are great. So don't go thinking that just because someone only works on machines that they suck and they're not going to build muscle. It's not exactly how it works. All right. So myth number 5, more gym time equals better results. So this is a myth that I once believed, and I used to work out 7 days a week thinking that if I took any days off, it was just a waste of time and it was just missed opportunities to make more progress. But unfortunately, that is not the case. We do need time to recover, and we break down muscle in the gym and we build muscle when we rest. So hitting the gym more is not going to mean better progress. It's just going to mean you're probably going to burn out and you're not going to make any more progress because your body cannot recover. So, I mean, there is an exception to it. There is individual, response to this. Some people can recover better than others. There's things that can factor into that, like age specifically. I know I definitely don't recover as well as I did in my 20s when I was doing those 7-day-a-week training plans. So maybe at some point my body could have handled it, but no one needs to train 7 days a week. More than likely, it's going to benefit you more to have recovery / rest days in there. All right. So myth number 6, you need supplements to succeed in strength training. And this isn't the case. So there's things that can help, like creatine, steroids, but the application is the same. Whether you're taking steroids or creatine or whatever or not, you still have to lift the weights. You still have to get your nutrition dialed in. And ultimately, those are the things that are going to help you progress. So maybe you can progress faster, or maybe you can progress past your genetic potential by taking things like, PEDs, aka steroids, but they are not going to do the work for you. So it doesn't matter what you take. It's just nothing is magic. You gotta put in the work. All right. So myth number 7, strength training decreases flexibility. So, there could be potential truth to this if you have a lot of muscle, like bodybuilders. I personally have a hard time like reaching parts of my back because you kind of get muscle bound. So if you've ever watched the Olympia and you see the open bodybuilders, chances are those guys have not been able to scratch their back for years. So either they have a great partner with some long nails to kind of get that itch for them, or they have back scratchers. But flexibility can kind of suffer. The more muscle you have, of course, you can still be flexible if you're working on your flexibility, and as long as you're not kind of muscle bound. So as long as you're not on, like PEDs, you're probably not going to end up being very muscle bound. So you can still do your stretching. There's also open bodybuilders that can still do the splits. So it's not going to completely just sit. It's not like you're definitely not flexible if you have muscle. That's not a thing. All right. So myth number 8, strength training is not for older adults. It's definitely far from the truth. I think everyone should be strength training, especially if you're older, because it helps keep you healthy. It helps prevent osteoporosis. So also if you fall or anything like that, you have some muscle to help protect, so you don't break anything. Or if you need to brace yourself from falling, having strength is going to help with that. It's also going to keep you independent longer. I don't know where I saw or where I heard it, but there's like a lot of, older folks that end up losing their independence just because they have a hard time using the restroom on their own because their legs aren't strong enough to get up on and off the toilet. So it's just like, if you can think about as you age and you want to continue to be independent, it is important that you stay strong. And maybe that's a long time from now for you at the moment, or maybe you feel like it's creeping up on you. I certainly do feel that. It's going to pay off in the long run. And strength training, it's not just about looking good. It's not just about being healthy. It's about quality of life. And strength training can help increase your quality of life because you can stay independent for longer through your old age. So definitely still strength train even if you are older. So myth number 9, you should always feel sore after a workout. You don't have to always feel sore. Sometimes you will, especially when you're first starting out. So soreness is not an indicator of having a good, efficient, effective workout. It's just an indicator that you created a new stimulus. You get sore sometimes from getting a massage or bowling. Doesn't mean you built muscle. It just means that there was some sort of new stimulus your body experienced, and that's why you're feeling sore. So do not judge the efficacy of your workout by how sore you feel. Then you're just kind of chasing a feeling instead of chasing progress. Okay, so myth number 10, the more sweat, the better the workout. It's not the case. Like, some people sweat more than others. It's just the body's response to trying to cool itself down. I'm someone who is not a huge sweater, especially in the gym, because it's air conditioned. So I will sweat a little bit, but I don't sweat a lot unless, if it's hot outside and I'm working out like in CrossFit, I would sweat a shit ton. But it's much harder to break a sweat when you're in an air conditioned gym. So it doesn't mean that you didn't work hard if you're not just drenched in sweat, because that can be genetic. And also, you know, I've had plenty of workouts where I am not sweating much, but it was still a difficult and intense workout. So yeah, do not gauge your workouts by your sweat amount. But yeah, all right. So that pretty much wraps, just the basics of training that I wanted to go through today. Hopefully this was helpful. If there's any topics or guests that you would like to see on the podcast, definitely let me know. If you just want even topics, I can think of guests that I could bring on for that. But yeah, or if you have any questions that you would like me to cover, leave them down in the comments. You can now comment on Spotify, which is great. And if you're watching this on YouTube, obviously you can comment down below. All right, guys, thank you so much for listening. Make sure to give it a like, subscribe if you are not already subscribed, and give it a share if you find that this would be helpful for a friend. That will help me out. All right, peace out, guys. I'll talk to you next time.